This is 7 Minutes Cyber with Danny Lawler of Request and myself, Sam Glynn of Code in Motion. And the 7 minutes start now. Danny, you and I were talking just before this episode about how we both engage with clients. Me on my side is cybersecurity risk, and on your side, it can entail outsourcing risk. And when I talk about cybersecurity with firms, we deal with whatever they can deal with within their immediate control. But we very quickly get into those that they rely on in their supply chain. And it kind of goes out into outsourcing risk. But their cybersecurity is very much dependent on their outsourced providers' cybersecurity. And what I identify is, it's nearly a blind spot that when we talk about outsourcing risk, that my clients don't necessarily always capture the fact that when they outsource to another unit within their group, that is also an outsourcing risk. And when they talk about cybersecurity, they need to ensure that that other unit within their group is also dealing with cybersecurity to the level that they need.
Absolutely. Outsourcing is an issue that the regulator here and internationally, you see it in a number of regulators as well. It's something that focuses their mind and attention quite a lot. And we see it dealing with regulated firms, a couple of blind spots, but one of them in particular is intragroup outsourcing, where it often gets missed and it's often not appreciated by a regulated firm, that where they outsource something to another group entity, as far as a regulator is concerned, and certainly as far as the regulator here is concerned, that's outsourcing. Mm-hmm. And all of the bells and whistles that go with an arrangement with an outsourcing service provider apply equally, whether you're delegating or outsourcing something to another unit within the group or it's to a third party.
Yeah, and it nearly goes back to some of the other episodes that we would have covered in the past around how do you get the attention, and in this case, the answers that you need to prove that this other unit, this intergroup unit, is dealing with cybersecurity to the level, at a minimum, to the level that the regulator would expect an Irish entity to handle this. And it nearly goes back into how does, even just in terms of general outsourcing, how does the Irish entity get the attention of their outsourced partner in the other part of the group?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that sometimes, as I said, firms don't appreciate intra-group outsourcing is outsourcing and the rules apply. And when you kind of have that discussion with them, the initial reaction is, well, surely there's no risk, or there's little risk or less risk with intra-group outsourcing. So why does the regulator care? Why is it an issue? And actually, how I think about it is that it's not that there's no risk. There is risk. It's just a different set of risks, whether it's intra-group outsourcing compared to third party. So, for example, what you mentioned there, Sam, exactly. One of the issues can be getting the attention of HQ and getting their buy-in and getting them to take you seriously. So you, as the leadership team in the Irish unit, are responsible for making sure that the outsourcing arrangement is gone through a proper governance process, for example. And so that will mean you doing due diligence on a group company that might be higher in the food chain than you are. But notwithstanding, you have to go through that process and make sure you're happy with it. And sometimes the reaction from HQ can be negative, to be frank. They can view it as a hassle or view it that you're above your station. So yeah, it can be difficult for the group, the unit here, to get that proper engagement, because, and not to be viewed as somebody going above and beyond what they're actually required to do.
Yeah, I mean, like what I've seen is, the Irish unit might be going a little further beyond what is reasonable in terms of security best practice, what I would call comfortable security. And the Irish firm needs to go to provable. So they go to the group unit and say, well, yeah, fair enough, you're telling us that you're doing the right things, but we need evidence, and we need it on a proactive basis. Whereas what we find is the parent units, the internal units, are saying, well, look, if you audit us, or if an external audit happens, we produce on a reactive basis, we can prove that we do this. Whereas the Irish entities say, no, I need this on a quarterly or a half yearly or yearly basis. This is part of your, management of controls, evidence of controls. And there's kind of a cultural and regulatory difference between units. And because even though there's a legal contract, it's not quite the same as a commercial agreement. The impetus on the parent isn't always there to kind of align their procedures and their processes with the needs of the Irish client, because the Irish client is acting above its station, as you described it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that can happen you talked about sort of different approaches from the different units. You know, the other unit might be in a jurisdiction where the regulatory regime is different, where if it's a much bigger market, you could be quite a big player, but get quite a deal less attention than you might do here, where you might be a much higher rated risk rating from prison perspective than another jurisdiction, so you get more attention. And also here in Ireland, we're seeing increasing focus on individual accountability through things like the fitness and probity regime and the pending senior executive accountability regime, all of which put emphasis on individuals making sure that they are being proactive and proving, which might be more than what's required in the jurisdiction where HQ is located, and so you can have that tension.
Yeah. I find it interesting that, you know, there is no magic bullet to deal with it, but I suppose the key thing when you have a problem is to recognize that you have the problem. So when it comes to dealing with cybersecurity risk and outsourcing risk in general, the blind spot that we see is the intragroup piece, where it's kind of outsourcing, but it's not quite outsourcing, and we're all part of the one happy family. We'll all be okay.
It's not kind of outsourcing.
1 minute left.
It is outsourcing. It is outsourcing. And the other area where this can manifest, or the other risk that you can see here that you might not see with a third-party outsourcing arrangement, is that you might assume that there's less risk and you'll be looked after by group, and you will be, but you might find that you're at the bottom of the queue. If you're part of a very large international financial services group and you have some sort of an IT failure that occurs across multiple jurisdictions, and you're the little old Irish unit, you might find that other units have their issues resolved before you do. Very little voice and very little leverage to have your issues resolved more quickly. So you find you're waiting a month to have the issue resolved. Whereas if it had been a third-party provider, you have maybe more leverage. And
absolutely. So there's an invoice. There's real money to be transferred when it's a commercial arrangement. So at least you have that leverage. I mean, your leverage is either money or reputation. So
we're at 7 minutes, so we better shut it off.
That's it. So I think really it's for people to be aware of the blind spot. That's the key message on this one. You know,
intragroup outsourcing is outsourcing.
Yeah. Perfect. Okay, Danny, thanks a lot.
Hi, Sam.